All right, we are live, and you are live with Kim Johnson. You're live on Our Voice, and today we have a very, very special. Dan Schueftan is an individual who travels a lot, and he is a consultant to a lot of not only Israeli decision makers, but a lot of decision makers throughout Europe, and now Asia, and of course America, and also in England, the UK. So with that, I am going to introduce you to Dan Schueftan. And we are going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about the most important issues that affect the Middle East. This is very, very important in light of some of the most recent developments with Turkey, with Lebanon, and with Iran, Hezbollah, etc., etc. We're going to be covering all that today in our subject of U.S.-Israel relations. So Dan, I want to welcome you to our Facebook Live. We've already had some fun. And let's begin with the most recent development between the U.S. and Turkey. The U.S. withdrawal from this area in Syria that has been predominantly not only occupied by the U.S. but by the Kurds helping the United States to fight the battle against ISIS in this region. What has developed, what has changed in your eyes, and how is that affecting U.S.-Israel relations and the perspective of the United States in the Middle East right now?
Let's make a distinction between what happened recently, which is unfortunate and I think a mistake by President Trump. But if you look at the overall situation, certainly from an Israeli point of view, not only is it not as bad as people portray it, but also there is a positive element if you look at the broader picture. The attitude towards Turkey and the Kurds is a mistake. A, because Turkey is being hostile and Erdogan is a very dangerous person.
Yes.
And if I were a member of NATO, I would insist that Turkey is kicked out of NATO because basically it works with the Russians against NATO. And it didn't even help the Americans in Iraq, if you remember the fact that they denied Incirlik for the American forces when they wanted to pursue their objectives in Iraq.
Yes.
So, and not only this, but also Turkey is going in a non-democratic direction. It is today an authoritarian regime in a direction of becoming even worse domestically in Turkey. And I don't think that the Turks should be helped in Syria. So whatever is good between America and Turkey is in the long run not a good decision from an American point of view. Also, forsaking the Kurds who've worked with the Americans is also not a very good decision. A, because you betray your ally, and B, because you send the wrong message in the region. Having said these two, the United States has a policy that I think is basically correct, namely, no direct American military involvement in the Middle East. And not only is it good for America, I think it's also good for Israel. And I will first explain the American perspective.
Okay.
You don't have the support in the United States for sending troops on the ground, boots on the ground, into the Middle East, and for a very good reason, because Americans made major mistakes. The most important mistake is the Iraq War, where the Americans tried to do not only the impossible, but the dumb idea of bringing democracy to Iraq. It is so impossible that it was stupid. The whole attempt, the whole reason for staying in Iraq for very long and paying this high price, because you want to reform the Arabs and bring them democracy, It's ridiculous, and it was ridiculous from day one. And anybody who doesn't understand that the very idea is ridiculous has a problem. I'm speaking about the Bush administration. For a moment.
Right, and we also had this Shiite Sunni situation.
Yes, but you see, beyond the Shiite Sunni situation, if you try to improve the world, if you start from the assumption that in every Saddam Hussein there is a little Thomas Jefferson trying to come out, only he had a difficult childhood. If you approach it from this angle, you're lost. Now, it's wrong when you do it the way Bush Jr. did, and it's absolutely the worst you can possibly imagine when you do it the way Obama did it, namely to reform the Middle East by being nice to the Arabs and by trying to persuade them that America is not their enemy, and by trying to basically abdicate, this is beyond the Middle East, to abdicate the role of the United States as the leader of the world order. So we've had 16 years and more of a profoundly wrong policy, and Americans, for very good reason, are sick and tired, and they're saying we will not send our boys, we will not waste trillions of dollars in order to make the Middle East a beautiful place. It cannot possibly be a beautiful place. It cannot possibly be a democracy. It cannot possibly be a relaxed place. This is a place where Arabs kill each other. This is what we've had here for 100 years, and anybody who believes it can be changed is wrong. So, for the Americans to say, we don't want to send our soldiers, we don't want American boots on the ground in the Middle East, is a good approach, and I'm for it. From an Israeli perspective, saying, on the one hand, we will not send out troops, but on the other hand, we will support our allies in the region who are willing to fight for themselves, as the Israelis are. Remember, Israel is the only ally of the United States who doesn't want American soldiers to fight for it. You take the Europeans, the Japanese, everybody who's closely associated with the United States, they want American soldiers to fight for them. Israelis say, we don't want American soldiers to fight for them. Right. So the basic trend of Trump saying, yes, I will be involved in the Middle East in many ways that are significant, but A, it is no longer a vital interest of the United States because the United States has energy independence and doesn't depend as directly on Middle Eastern oil as it did for a long time. The United States is an energy exporter, not an energy importer. The Middle East is also much less important because we no longer have this fantasy that once you have peace in the Middle East, the whole world becomes stabilized, or at least large parts of the world become stabilized. This idea of let's pacify the Middle East and everybody will love each other and ride into the sunset and live happily ever after. Once Americans lost this fantasy, I think it's a very good thing. And then, if you say, I'm not sending my troops, but I'm supporting my allies, it's a good thing. And therefore, I think it's a mistake, the attitude vis-a-vis the Kurds. But when it comes to Israel, the United States is much more supportive to Israel than ever before.
Yes, yes.
And the Americans don't need to, because we are not asking for it. We don't even want it to send American soldiers to defend Israel. You need American support politically. You need the United States to support Israel in the United Nations so there are no sanctions on Israel that the Europeans would have supported. You need American technology. You need American resupply in time of war. You need the Americans to be on our side so our enemies know they cannot drive a wedge between Israel and the United States, as they could very easily in the Obama period.
Yes.
So this is tremendously important, and Israel has this support by the United States. Again, I would have preferred if the Americans would have supported also the Kurds, because the American forces in northern Syria were not fighting forces essentially. They were more like a strategic tripwire. saying, we Americans are here, so you Turks cannot come in, and you Iranians cannot come in. And remember, the Americans have not left eastern Syria. They're sitting in Tanaf, they're sitting on the route between Iran to Lebanon, to Syria, so they still have this strategic tripwire in Syria. So it's very important that the Americans have not abandoned the Middle East, and they have not abandoned even Syria. I'm sorry they did it in northeastern Syria with the Kurds, but they're still here. Their support for Israel is still solid, so that I am sorry vis-a-vis the Kurds and vis-a-vis the Turks, because I would have wanted to see an American policy that is pro-Kurdish and anti-Turkish. But I understand that at the moment Americans believe that Turkey is not yet lost, that they still want Turkey in NATO, they have bigger fish to fry, and it's legitimate for a world power to look for the overall picture, because they're responsible not just for the Kurds, but for a broader set. Again, I'm sorry about their advantages, their priorities on the micro level, but I'm very encouraged by their priorities on the macro level. Now, this will be determined to a very large extent over the question of Iran, because with all due respect to Syria and Turkey and the Kurds, these are minor issues. The major issue is Iran. Iran is threatening the entire Middle East. Iranian hegemony in this region will have global repercussions. The question of how much will the United States support Saudi Arabia is much more important than the issue of Syria. The question if the United States will respond and how it will respond to what the Iranians did in Saudi Arabia is much, much more important. I don't think we've heard the last from this confrontation. The Americans needed a few months in order to strengthen their defenses in Saudi Arabia against Iranian cruise missiles and other weapons that the Americans were not prepared with. So I don't think we've heard the last about what's happening there, and this is an important test case. So when you look at the overall picture, even when you say, I don't like this particular part, you need to ask yourself what is happening in the broader arena.
Well, everyone, I'm going to make a little quick test here for all of you in a minute. It's very interesting that John Bolton, before he resigned or left the administration, he had this whole idea of moving out of Syria was already in place, and the part of his proposition was very specific to making sure the Kurds were safe when and if we move the U.S. troops out. So a lot of people have asked me, and it's really kind of a minor question, however, a lot of people have mentioned it. So I'd like to just pose it to you. It's a very basic question, but on the heels of us pulling out of Syria, then we were able to find, and we have the location of Bugatti, and we were able to assassinate him, or he blew himself up, who was, of course, the head of ISIS. So this has been the question. Do you think there was a negotiation between the Turks for the location of Bugatti to be able to take him out if indeed we in turn pulled out and gave them this 30-kilometer buffer zone they wanted?
I don't know, but if I were put in a position where I would choose between this issue of the 30 kilometers and the Kurds and so on, and information concerning Baghdadi, I would not prefer the information concerning Baghdadi.
Yeah.
But I don't know anything about the substance of it, and I think speculations here are endless, and
Sure,
there's no
absolutely.
point in going
Absolutely.
into these details.
Absolutely. All right. All right.
just
Talked about one of the issues that has developed here under the Trump administration. One that has caused a lot of I don't want to say division, but a lot of pushback to President Trump from even Congress, even the Republican Congress in Washington. However, as Dr. Schueftan just explained, he just said that if you look at the larger picture and the issues that are on the table there, this, even though it was and appears to be, a mistake, not, or let's just say maybe a bad judgment call, all right? However, in the larger scheme of issues that are taking place here in the Middle East, there are more important things to focus on than what just took place in Turkey. So that's where we just left off. Now I want to shift to something that you said regarding the hegemony of Iran. I want to talk about, let's go back to the Obama Doctrine, which was really what instituted such a collapse and shift of powers here in the Middle East, and how his really abdicating our role here in the Middle East allowed Russia to really come in, align itself very closely with Iran and Turkey and other states in the region. So forming what we would see as like an Iranian, Russian, maybe Turkey axis, but an axis of power with Iran at the center, leading the hegemony here. And then also now that Trump has come in, we see another axis, which is Israel. Hello, everyone. Okay, what are some of the main issues that we are now focused on here in this region with these developments over the last now eight years, basically?
First of all, there is no Iranian, Russian, Turkish axis. There's a lot of tension between these three, and here and there they have the same interest in weakening the United States. But I don't think there is an axis, and when I speak about the danger of hegemony, I'm speaking about Iran, not the hegemony of this axis. You're correct, though, that the Americans, the Israelis, and the Saudis have very similar interests, and the Egyptians and the Jordanians join in part of it. So this is true that you have a group here. When it comes to the Iranian threat, it is Iran, and occasionally there is an overlap of interest with other elements, but first and foremost, it is Iran. First, you must understand the profound difference between the Iranian society and Arab societies, because in the West, and I'm sorry to say also in Israel, people confuse all these people. They're Muslims, they're speaking strange languages, they're out there in the Middle East, they're terrorists, so they're the same. Arabs may be very vicious when it comes to radical actions, and we've seen the very extreme case with Daesh, with ISIS, but basically Arabs are failing societies, and the Arab states are failing states. And I don't see in the foreseeable future having much hope for the Arabs in terms of their impact in the world, because their societies are so weak that even when people go out in the street and they rebel against their leaders, the society is even worse than their corrupt and authoritarian leadership. The alternative to Gaddafi, who was not only a barbarian and a lunatic, but also one of the strange people, that roamed this earth. The alternative of Libyan society is even worse than Gaddafi.
Which we're seeing,
You would have imagined it's impossible. On the other hand, the Iranian society is very impressive. These are not Arabs. These are people who have science, who have even a sense of pluralism. In spite of the fact they have a barbaric regime, they have a very impressive society. And in the long run, when they get rid of this regime, Israel and Iran will have a lot in common. And perhaps the most important thing, these are the two entities in this region that have a future. The Iranians have a future. These people are really impressive. And by the way, it's problematic for Israel because having an enemy that is as capable as the Iranians, having been used to enemies like the Arabs, who are not very impressive, to put it mildly, some of us still don't understand that we are facing a completely different category of enemy. And Iran is a formidable enemy that needs to be taken very, very seriously. Now, because the Arabs are so weak, the Iranians can be so strong. And there are two strategies here. The wrong Obama strategy and the correct Trump strategy. And whereas I have many reservations about Trump and many reservations about specific policies he may have here or there, when it comes to Iran, Obama was perfect in being wrong, and Trump is perfect in terms of having the overall picture of Iran as the major enemy in this region. So here, without reservations, Trump has the right approach, namely, weaken Iran. Whatever is bad for Iran under this regime is good for everybody else, for Israel, for of course for the United States, but also for Israel, for Egypt, for Jordan, for the Sunni Arab countries in general, because if you don't weaken Iran, they will take over the region because the Arab states are so weak, and the only thing that stands between Iran and domination in the region is Israel, with American support. Now, what Trump is doing, and I think it's the right thing, he is using economic measures because what the Iranians want is what they got when Obama was president, namely the false perception as if there are only two options, war or capitulation. So let the Americans capitulate because they don't want war. What Trump says, I have a third option. I don't have to go to war with Iran. I can undermine them economically. And we're speaking about billions of dollars that they get, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars that they get only because America is not fighting them and actually under Obama even helping them. So denying them this money, putting pressure on other countries not to trade with them, realizing that they're so totally dependent on oil revenues, making oil exports so difficult on Iran, I think is the right policy. And also saying, you Iranians want to persuade the American public that if we don't capitulate, if the Americans don't capitulate to Iran, there will be a war. So you want a situation where America becomes involved militarily, because this will weaken the United States. So I think it was a good idea not to respond militarily to the downing of the unmanned aircraft. And I think it was the right approach not to respond militarily, but economically, to the tankers that were sabotaged by Iran. And I think it is the correct approach, if you intend to do something in the future, not to respond immediately to what happened in Saudi Arabia before defenses in Saudi Arabia are in place against Iranian hits on Saudi oil production, provided you continue the economic pressure, because the Iranians are hysteric. The economic pressures are enormously effective, very, very, very effective. The Iranians want to create a situation that it is not. And unfortunately, some people buy into the picture that they're trying to create about the sanctions. The sanctions are very, 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 very effective. Okay? So keep them. And whatever they do, make the sanctions harder. And you shouldn't have any limits about making the sanctions harder, because the Iranians cannot afford to deal with their very serious economic pressures at home and at the same time spend tens of billions in Syria and in Yemen and in Iraq and in other places. So hit them where it hurts, and where it hurts is economically. Okay? And you don't have to send American troops into battle unless America is directly attacked, okay? Or American interests, vital interests, are directly attacked. So I basically think that the attitude towards Iran, understanding that whatever is bad for Iran is good for America. There's a zero-sum game between Iran and America. The fact that the Europeans cannot understand it, and that they're so miserable and ridiculous, okay, shouldn't affect the American position on the subject. And by the way, I would not oppose, I think it would be a good idea if the Senate, with support of the Republicans, puts sanctions also on Turkey. This would be a good idea, a good addition. Now, we're not speaking about the same danger. Iran is by far the number one immediate threat to vital interests of the United States and its allies in the region. But if alongside you also do something against Turkey, even if it's not the administration but the Congress, I think it would be a very good addition.
I think slipping under that on the issue of humanitarian rights could be very effective. I would agree with that. Now, there is an interesting statement that you made that I want to play off of, and that has to do with the difference within the Iranian culture and the Arab culture. And it appears that we really only have one Arab country that is standing up to the challenge, or at least attempting to, culturally, economically, and militarily, and that is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has there's a forging of an alliance even here with Israel and the United States. What can Saudi Arabia do with the Iranian threat hanging not only over Israel's head in the Middle East, but when we're talking hegemony here, we are talking a visceral hatred with Iran to Saudi Arabia and vice versa. So what role can Saudi Arabia play to try and minimize the danger and the spreading of Iran?
Let's not make the kind of mistake that Americans very often make, and this is when we have a community of interest with somebody, we're trying to say nice things about it. Look, in order to defeat Hitler, we needed to cooperate with Stalin.
Yes.
Did it make Stalin less of a barbarian?
No.
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 But Americans, in order to explain why they are willing to supply weapons and other things, some Americans refer to Stalin as Uncle Joe. Well, let's be very, very careful about suddenly finding out how great Saudi Arabia is just because there is a community of interest between Israel and Saudi Arabia, the United States and Saudi Arabia. The Saudis suffer even worse than other Arab states from the weaknesses of Arab political culture. If in other parts of the Middle East you have to dig a little deeper, not much deeper, but a little deeper, to find out that we're not speaking about a modern state, but about a tribal society, in Saudi Arabia it's on the surface. So even in American universities that try to deal with the Middle East as if we're speaking about modern political structures, and they're failing to see that we are speaking about tribal societies. In Saudi Arabia, it's even American universities, these American universities who did it, will very easily recognize that we have. So, yes, we have a community of interest, and the community of interest comes from the fact that Iran wants to take over Saudi Arabia more than any other country in the region, because if it controls all the oil of the Persian, or most of the oil of the Persian Gulf, which is essentially the Iranian, the Iraqi, and the Saudi Arabian, and when Saudi Arabia falls, then the other smaller entities in the region become even weaker vis-a-vis Iran, so they have an enormous control. So because the Saudis are threatened, we have a community of interest with them. Because they have such a large a portion of the oil export market, then if we lose the Iranian market, the Saudi market can compensate for it without the prices going through the roof. So yes, we have a community of interest. Yes, we can work together. Yes, you have today a ruler in Saudi Arabia who's willing to open up a little bit his society and to be somewhat less tribal. But this is not, this is not the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
But for now,
I'd work with
it's
them.
working. For now, at least we have common interest. But that's, and it is a very serious threat. Iran is a very serious threat to Saudi Arabia as well. Let's move. We're looking at the main issues, the issues that Trump is facing here in the Middle East. What are the main issues that are most important for us to take a look at in U.S.-Israel relations that are affecting the world? So we've just talked about Turkey. We've just talked about Iran, and let's go to Lebanon. Big development, big protests in Lebanon.
Yes, but you see, the question is, can these protests bring a healing to the fundamental, to the structural problems of Lebanon? And unfortunately, the answer is no. Look, about 9 years ago, 8 years ago, everybody was very excited about what they called the Arab Spring. And they started from, the Spring of Nations and these ideas that here the Arabs finally come out for democracy and so on, and everybody was very excited. And I met the leaders of the Tahrir Square in Egypt, and I told them, look, you're the best thing that could have happened to Egypt, but you're not Egypt. You will fail. You have the chances of a snowball in hell. The chances are really very, very limited. And in Lebanon today, maybe things will be for a while not as bad as now and a bit better, but then there is constantly the risk of civil war. Actually, Lebanon oscillates constantly between what seems to be a good life on the surface and civil war. And when you're in civil war, good life is coming, and when you have a good life, the civil war is coming, because there is something structurally wrong about Lebanon, which becomes even worse recently because of Hezbollah taking over in
That's
Lebanon, namely
that's where I wanna
Iran
go.
taking over
That's
in
right.
Lebanon,
That's right.
and the huge influx of refugees from Syria. So the very bad situation Lebanon is permanently in becomes even worse now that Hezbollah is in power. Now, if there is a confrontation between Israel and Iran, Iran will see to it that Hezbollah will make war against Israel, hitting Tel Aviv, hitting the centers of population in a very massive way. The inevitable consequence of this is the destruction of Lebanon and enormous suffering in Lebanon. So you have everything that brings calamity to Lebanon already structured in the Lebanese system. So there can't be anything good about it. You need to make this distinction between a country like Israel that from time to time has wars and from time to time Israelis suffer, and what you have in the Arab world, and Lebanon is not an exception, where the bad situation, the hopelessness, the lack of future is a permanent feature. Now, can it change one day? Yes. Can Arabs have one day a cultural revolution that will change the situation? Yes, we've seen cultural revolutions in the Middle East. We've seen two in Turkey. A positive one in the 1920s and a very negative one in the beginning of this millennium. So cultural revolutions are possible, only there is zero signs that a positive cultural revolution is about to happen in the Arab world. So saying that it's not impossible doesn't mean that it's pending, okay? Because we have zero indications.
I would agree with that.
In terms
just look at the allies. Yeah.
Of the mainstream of the Arab world,
Yes.
that we are about to have a positive cultural revolution.
Yes.
So if you're in Lebanon, your future is dim, even if for a while on the surface you seem to have a very good life, but the foundations of this structure are profoundly rotten. But other than that, I'm an optimist.
All right, let's stay here for just a minute, because you know the uprising now it's really basically an economic collapse in Lebanon.
It's not basically an economic collapse.
No,
The economy is a symptom of everything being wrong.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Everything in Lebanon is wrong. People protest against the economic ramifications of it. They protest over the fact that they don't get any services from the countries at work. But the structure is wrong. It cannot be fixed by economic means. Okay? As long as Hezbollah is so strong, as long as Hezbollah siphons off all the money through the government, as long as they control, as long as they have a veto power, when you have 1.5 million refugees, when the different factions fight each other, by the way, the Christians as much as the Muslims, so it's not just the Muslim business. This is a tribal society that looks as if it is. We used to call it in the 50s and 60s the Switzerland of the Middle East. Okay? Not as many cuckoo clocks here. And chocolate.
So, well, here we are with the cuckoo clocks.
Yeah.
So for my audience, just for the audience.
Okay.
So what's happened? Oh, where'd I go? All right. What's happened now is that the Prime Minister of Lebanon has resigned, Saad Harari, al-Harari. All right. He's resigned, thinking that may actually kind of quell the protests, but it hasn't. Of course, Hezbollah gaining even more power is a major concern. How it's fueling that. So for everyone, on the heels of that, President Trump then freezes the military aid to Lebanon, about 105 million to the Lebanese actually army, okay?
Which
But-
goes directly to Hezbollah.
So this is,
Because Hezbollah controls the army.
yes,
There is no Lebanese. There is no Lebanon.
okay,
Lebanon is the figment of the imagination of people who collect stamps, philatelists. Because in the world of philately, there is a Lebanon because they have
That
stamps and
Gabrielle.
it says Lebanon. Okay?
yes. So there's where we sit right now. And so technically, and you just heard Dan say this, so I want everyone to understand, the president freezing this military aid is to, in some way, put an obstacle between the money that should be going to help the Lebanese army, all right, as an ally, that money being funneled into Hezbollah, and Hezbollah even gaining more economic freedom militarily. Am I correct with that? All right.
Yes, approximately. Look, Hezbollah benefits from drug trades. Whatever it touches is corrupt. We're speaking about people who are part of the global terrorism network of Iran. I don't think we've ever had in history a country with a global network of terrorism like Iran. Okay? I would not be surprised if they will try to assassinate Trump before the elections. I would not be surprised. We're speaking about people who have no problem whatsoever destroying the Jewish trying to kill as many people with the Jewish community in Argentina because they don't like something that Israel did here. We're speaking about barbarians, and this is part of the rule of barbarism. And then Europeans will tell you that they're against the military wing of Hezbollah, but for the political wing of Hezbollah. So,
I agree.
this is Europe.
Europe
is...
it in fact is very, very interesting about France coming out and just in such a dither over the loss of Harari, and they're like, but you have to get a government quick, fast, or
Hariri,
Hezbollah will take over. And what we're saying is
has
Hezbollah
already
already taken over. Exactly. So it's but on the heels of that, we're going to wrap up. Let's come back. Everybody is wondering on the really in America and on the world stage, Israel potentially could be facing a three-front war, and Israel, especially Hamas in Gaza, Iran, Hezbollah, even Russian troops coming down.
No, Russian troops will not attack Israel so fast. I mean, I wouldn't.
I agree with you.
We're not at war with Russia.
But people see these things, and they're highlighted, so we have to kind of.
Yeah, okay, but let's make a distinction between real immediate threats, and Hezbollah is, and of course Iran more than anything else is, and Hamas is, and you could have an uprising in the West Bank. These are very realistic possibilities.
In the paper, yesterday, today, Khomeini comes out, Iran threatening a 6-month rocket barrage on Israel. Hamas today comes out saying remove the blockade.
Okay.
Look,
all this is not news. This is what they say, this is what they do, this is what they live for, this is what they get up in the morning for.
This is what I want you to hear.
Yeah, this is what they put ahead of the welfare of their own children.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
People in the Gaza Strip, people like Hamas or Islamic Jihad, and they're representative of the population in the West, in the Gaza Strip. They have not, it's not a hostile takeover. These people have received billions of dollars, and every penny of it is dedicated to killing Jews. This is what they're about. They don't have a real life. They don't want to have a real life. They don't try to improve their life. They're trying to improve their position so that they can kill Jews more effectively. This is the only thing they live for, okay? Yes. And therefore, my grandchildren will be fighting in Gaza. This is a problem that has no solution, because you have people that don't have a constructive part. They don't have a constructive bone in their body. They're not trying to build their own society. Look, the Arab states for the last 100 years have done precious little to build their own society, which is one of the reasons they're in such terrible state. We are speaking about countries in the Middle East who are potentially filthy rich. I mean, look, Iraq, Algeria, Libya, these are countries that, could be one of the richest, because they have these huge resources, and people have nothing to eat, okay? Yes. Exclusively because of Arab political culture. And then you have the excuses.
Yes.
Oh, it's colonialism, it's occupation, it's globalization, this is all ridiculous, because you look at countries who were not occupied and you find the same. You find countries who were not colonized and are in the same situation. You find countries who were not directly affected by globalization and certainly did not try to fit into it. So these ridiculous excuses are good for journalists and academics, okay, who want excuses. You have serious journalists and serious academics who look at the realistic picture. But those who want excuses will find excuses, and I don't really mind, because, it's so easy to see what brings it about. Unfortunately, I don't see a very major change for the better in the near future.
So, and let me just make a comment very quick, and then we will close it up with the last question on this same topic, okay? In the paper today, and I want to drive this home, you heard it from Dan, this is the reality on the ground. And I want to drive it home by the statement that was made by Hamas today in this whole issue of saying we will barrage Israel with 6 months of rockets if they don't remove this big blockade, because Israel has created this humanitarian crisis in the coastal enclave. This is what they said. But this is the reality on the ground. You just heard him say that all of the funding, the millions and millions and millions billions, okay, let's go, billions of dollars are going solely to the arsenal to try and destroy the Jews in Israel. So they have created their own humanitarian crisis. And they want Israel to be their scapegoat, so the international community will take pity on them. And this is not the reality. The reality is they've created their own crisis. The blockade is there because of them. And once again, their propaganda will not work, at least with our media outlet. All right, so is Israel ready? Are we ready?
Look,
what is it that we need to be prepared for from these two fronts?
You're never ready. There's never been in human history a situation where a country was ready for every challenge, because things develop during war, and I must admit that the only field where Arabs are creative is when it comes to violence. And they come up with new ideas. I mean, would you imagine a few years ago that the Arabs would be using condoms against Israel? They take condoms, they fill it with helium, they put bombs under it, and they send it to Israel, or incendiary bombs, and what have you. So they will weaponize condoms. They should have used condoms for the original purpose, but they. So, are you ready for everything? No. Will you be surprised here and there? Yes. But is Israel strong enough to withstand these enormous pressures? Yes. Because most Israelis don't live in European La La Land or in the La La Land of some Americans who believe that all you need is some goodwill and then we'll all ride into the sunset and live happily ever after. So the most important thing to be prepared for is not to expect that people who have proven themselves to be violent and to put violence at the top of their national priorities and then come with their ridiculous excuses that you must be an idiot to even listen to, let alone, I mean, if you professionally have to, I have to, okay, then you listen to. But if you are a serious person, you shouldn't even take them seriously because it's so ridiculous. It is so completely separate from reality. And most Israelis are not like that. The overwhelming majority. We have our share of Lala people, okay? But the overwhelming majority of Israelis are much more realistic and they realize they have a very good life in Israel, very optimistic in Israel, in spite of the fact that you are surrounded by a culture that did not do much to help itself since people in this region became independent. And you can't expect this to be a peaceful part of the world because they're not peaceful vis-a-vis each other. They kill each other in the millions, okay? And they've been doing it for a very long time. And in the midst of this, you can't expect to have an oasis of peace, love, and brotherhood. And in that sense, we're prepared. Do we have a strong army? Do we have a strong economy? Do we have a very resilient society? Yes, I think. And from time to time, we will make mistakes and we will get hit and we will recuperate from it.
Very good. Well, let us know if you have any questions. Give us some feedback of the interview today because we're going to come back to you in the near future and talk about some more in-depth issues. This was fairly basic, but I think important for the audience to get a framework. And now we will come back, but also I want to hear from you. We are working on a project that will entail, we'll give you a little bit more specifics in the future, but it will entail a study tour, about 7 days. I want to know if you are going to be interested coming to Israel and engaging in a 5 to 7 day study tour with Dr. Schueftan and other top leaders that we would put together so you can learn about the ethos, the way Israel thinks, national security strategies, and the startup nation. So let us hear from you today, and I want to know where you're from, if you enjoyed the interview, and if you would like to hear more in the future. All right? So thank you for being with us. I lost all you guys, so I can't go back and get you. So anyways, shalom, shalom for Israel. I want to thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your perspective. I think you have gotten the message across. I believe we have gotten the message across. Remember to like and to share. This will also be up on YouTube. So like, share, and we will see you in our next Our Voice. Okay? So thank you so much for joining us today. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Oh, bye-bye. But I got to come up until we are able to get a third.
אדון עולם אתה הגדול מכולם, אני בן אדם, קטונתי להיות מושלם.